Hey everybody, I'm going to talk about my learning adventure, which was looking at planning for institutional implementation. And one of the reasons that I wanted to take this particular elective in the MET was because I'm interested in seeing how learning analytics might impact what we do at Vancouver Community College. So at the moment, like many other institutions at all levels, we collect large amounts of data from our learning management system, from our library systems, our video system, our registration system, feedback from students, all of those kinds of different sources of data. But we're not really making use of this data in ways that can improve student learning. So in short, we're not doing learning analytics. And in my role at the college, I'm the e-learning manager. I've got a longer title, as you can see, but I call myself e-learning manager because it's a bit of a mouthful. Um, I'm kind of uniquely placed to be able to advocate for the implementation of learning analytics. I work with senior leadership, I work with faculty and other colleagues to promote best practices in online teaching and learning. And it seems to me that places such as the Teaching and Learning Centre, where I work, the Centre for Teaching, Learning and Research, CTLR, we're probably the best fit for leading an implementation of learning analytics. Even though learning analytics implementations involve lots of technical and change management areas and pedagogical considerations, I think something like a teaching and learning center is probably the place that should be leading these kind of initiatives. Now, for the assignment here, I wanted to ask a particular overarching question, which would be how would I make the case for learning analytics at VCC? And I'm kind of selfish in this because I'd like to use this as the basis for a future presentation to my leadership team for implementing learning analytics. So who would I need to convince and how would I go about doing that convincing? A lot of what I'm looking at here came out of module 5 of the course, and in particular the Roma model that we looked at in module 5. And I kind of came to realize that Roma, although it's set up as a model for the implementation of learning analytics, it's actually a useful framework for looking at how you would argue for that implementation in the first place. I tried to find some sources. I used the keywords learning analytics, implementation, and higher education, and I Googled the UBC library, Google Scholar, and some other places, and I found some key resources, and I found some literature reviews that came in quite handy. Um, I selected sources based on their young age, so anything less than 10 years old, really, and that made specific reference to the implementation of learning analytics in higher ed contexts. I was quite surprised at the paucity of reporting on successful implementations. And it's something that Leah McFadyen also notes. She says that, and I quote, very few well-developed examples of learning analytics deployment at scale across educational institutions exist, and even fewer credible studies can be found in the peer-reviewed learning analytics literature of demonstrated impact on learning or student success at scale. This is not all doom and gloom. She does also suggest, this is from a 2022 paper, she does also suggest that the Learning Analytics Community Exchange, or LACE, which is part of SOLA, might become a venue where such evidence can be shared as and when it becomes available. But I found enough literature to make a stab at doing a presentation in any case. So I started using the Roma model itself as the framework for what I wanted to talk about. I looked at the different stages of it and I used those as kind of a way of laying out my assignment. The model's cyclical, as you can see. So it has this notion that it's not once and done. You kind of revisit it. So you get to the end and you're constantly revisiting and trying to improve your approach. Uh, the key central first step is this defining and redefining your policy objectives. And in our context, that would mean making sure that any implementation was tied into existing frameworks. We have a thing at VCC called the Strategic Innovation Plan, and I'd want to make sure that this implementation would be related to the Strategic Innovation Plan, and senior management would expect that as well. Mapping the context. who would be the right people to advocate for using learning analytics, and how would we go about the business of evangelizing to the faculty at large? I think this is where my department is pretty well placed, because we're like a bridge between different departments, and we have a good handle on how the different parts of the college interrelate, where the silos are, and how we could overcome some of those silos. Key stakeholders, this is a really big part. We'd need to be able to demonstrate who they were and how they'd be affected by the change. I found, again, McFadyen's 2022 paper was very useful in this regard, in identifying who the stakeholders tend to be in an implementation. I've suggested using a RACI matrix to indicate who would be responsible, accountable, consulted, and informed at each stage. And Ferguson's paper from 2014 also points out the financial and logistical realities mean that you really have to prioritize selected stakeholders and purposes. I think that's quite important from our context. We'd want to have a fairly tight scope and not try and do everything at once. God, 8 minutes isn't very long, is it? Then I looked at the desired behavioral changes, and that's kind of identifying the why. This is a big thing. What is the why of learning analytics? Why are we doing it in the first place? And identifying the why is kind of intimately tied into identifying the stakeholders, because different stakeholders are going to have a different idea of the why. Depending if they're an administrator, a faculty, a student, they might have different ideas of why you would want to do this. Engaging faculty in any implementation, this would be a really big deal. How are we going to go about engaging people? And a large part of what I did for this presentation was to look at an environmental scan to try and convince my senior managers that, look, this is what our competitors are doing. This is what BCIT is doing. This is what Douglas College are doing. We need to not fall behind. Or this is an opportunity for us to get ahead of the competition, because it is a competition. Analyzing the internal capacity to affect change. So this is institutional readiness, and I thought that the questionnaire that JISC came up with, which I think was referenced in Module 5 as well, would be useful for this. So we'd look at our institutional readiness. I think we'd have more than one person. It wouldn't just be me doing this. I'd have a few people looking at institutional readiness so that we could kind of agree on where we are and where we need to go. And then we'd need to do some evaluation. It's not good enough just to have a plan. We need to demonstrate that what we've done actually has the desired effect. So as part of the institutional readiness, I think we'd definitely identify some barriers to adoption. And again, Leah McFadyen's paper here was very useful in describing some of the main challenges, and pretty much all of them would apply at VCC, from existing decision-making strategies being based on anecdote, to different definitions of what student success means, depending on the stakeholders. Definitely a lack of integration of IT platforms and systems, big problem here. Lack of consistent ideas about learning design, and the various ethical challenges that we're all familiar with using student data. I think the biggest barrier of all, though, would be what she describes as complexity leadership, which is the requirement to have distributed knowledge across multiple roles in the organization. That would be a difficult one to overcome. So the way I conclude is by saying that learning analytics implementation at VCC would be a huge change management process. And would we do this through a bottom up or through a top down approach, or a combination of the two? I don't know. But what I do know is that we can't continue with the status quo. Not implementing learning analytics is probably the worst option that we have. Thank you very much, and good luck with the rest of your studies.